Talon Dive refers to instant-based comps that employ Moira as their flex support. It is one of the most popular comps, not only in the Overwatch League, but many amateur teams run this comp, hopeful to replicate its success in the league. There are slight variations of the comp, with heroes like Reaper, Genji, Echo, and Brig, but there is one thing in common. It destroys teams that are unprepared to deal with it. If you're watching this video, you're likely a victim of a well-executed Talon dive, but you don't have to be. With just a few simple tips, you can dumpster this comp and have the last laugh. So let's consider how Talon dive wins fights. It is very good at blowing up targets that are close to it, especially if they're isolated from their team or they're able to be pushed into an enclosed area of the map. But it has a number of fatal weaknesses that you can exploit. Talon Dive lacks sustain, which means I can't take too much poke before it has to reposition. Talon Dive gives up map control, as having Moira as your flex support means if you want heals, you better be close to her. So the tanks and DPS of the comp basically have to stay pretty close together at all times. Or almost at all times. Sometimes, they will look for splits, but usually they'll stay together. And Talon Dive is very dependent on its resources. We're talking about abilities like Winston Bubble, Diva's Defense Matrix, as well as Moira's limited healing resources. To win a fight, Talon Dive needs to kill someone quickly. That is because the more damage that the Talon Dive team takes, not killing something, the more resources it has to use just to sustain itself, which renders it unable to, well, actually kill something. And unlike Ryan Rush comps, Talon Dive sucks at forcing the point, and unlike Dive comps, Talon Dive cannot play slow for map control. It has to get stuff done quick, or go back to spawn. Let's talk about 4 principles you should follow when playing against the comp. First, when there's still distance between you and the enemy, don't be afraid to play split. You need to have angles on the enemy to actually poke them out effectively. Think about it. If you're literally clumped together as 6, the enemy diva can literally just press right click and eat all your team's damage. It doesn't matter if you're playing poke or brawl, playing split at first gives you the most opportunity to poke and preempt the enemy's engage. Make sure you kind of group closer together once they close the distance though. And speaking of which, playing together does not mean playing stacked. The easiest way to give the enemy a team wipe is to position way too close to each other so that Winston cleaves all 6 of your team. The most vulnerable targets on your team should be positioned with the players who have the best peel, but anyone who has escape abilities or is hard to kill should still play split. Not too split so that they can be isolated, but split enough to catch the enemy's engage and punish it. Second, avoid positioning in enclosed spaces. Talon Dive excels in close range fights, and if you position in the smallest rooms in the game, all you'll get are close range fights. Here, Chengdu rotate their backline through an enclosed space, which allows field to just collapse on them. Worst of all, and while Gaga got a trade kill, Leave and Jinmu are unable to do much against the dense clump of field players in that small space. Chengdu do the right thing next fight. By positioning in more open space, Fiel has a harder time isolating Zen. More open positioning gives Chengdu more angle pressure. If Fiel want to rush down Monk now, who is the Zen, they have to contend with multiple different angles. Third, you need to be kiting the enemy and using your poke as much as possible. Remember, Talon Dive does not want to be fighting poke battles because it barely has any poke. As long as you can control the point, you don't need to take a fight quickly. Time is on your side. Here, Vancouver run out on Talon Dive while Boston play Ryan Rush comp. While Ryan Rush doesn't have stellar poke, it still has more poke than a Talon Dive team. Since Boston can force the point once it unlocks any time, they decide to just kite Vancouver. Eventually, Vancouver gives in and engages into certain death. And finally, generally fights against Talon Dive will follow this structure. You first want to position your backline in a secure position, not in a small space, and far away from the enemy. Then, you set up angles around the enemy, making sure to not get too isolated, and then poke the enemy out. Don't be stupid yourself. Force them to do something stupid. And when the enemy does engage, you want to catch it. What that means depends on your comp. If you're running a brawl comp, you want to use as many abilities as it takes for you to stay alive. Remember, you just need to stay alive and are dead. When you're running a dive comp, you want to be counter diving, trying to engage on the enemy backline yourself, or if you're running ball, booping players away from your team. And if you're running a spam comp, you want to peel for the teammate being targeted, while having players not being targeted become more aggressive to try to punish or engage. For this example, you set up your BAP and Mercy on the bridge, which is hard for the enemy to access without rotating through open space. Then, as shown before, you spread out a bit and whittle the enemy down. And finally, when they do land on a target, you look to peel for them. Sigma might use both Grasp and Rock, while Baptiste himself uses Immortality Field to sustain himself. But the rest of the team just doesn't sit there and await death. They want to be playing more aggressive, looking to catch the enemy and get kills in return. If you're running Brawl, it's more straightforward. You're going to throw abilities at the enemy and try to punish their dive. D.Va, though, has a very important role. And by the way, please run D.Va, please don't run Zarya, or Sigma's fine, but please don't run Zarya against us. She must deal with any off angles the enemy is taking, while the rest of her team deals with the enemy core. Dive's the most complex, but you will want to typically save your abilities to catch the enemy engage, instead of looking for a dive of your own. Use poke to force out enemy abilities and bait the enemy to engage you. When they do start to engage, you want to respond with an engage of your own at the same time. Unlike Talon dive, traditional dive comps are better at playing from multiple angles and playing the counter dive game. Again, your D.Va wants to focus on peeling off the enemy's damage threats, and please run D.Va by the way, especially Reaper or Tracer if they have one.